Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, June 18th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman of NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay. Hi. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
You're looking very casual today. Getting ready for Father's Day.
Exactly. And happy Father's Day to you as well in advance. And, here we are, distant. I think we represent a lot of technology industries, getting back to these things, but getting back to them gradually.
The state is reopened.
Yeah.
In theory, I go out and get my coffee every morning, and I'm still amazed how many people are inside in closed cars, windows up, alone with their masks on. We're not giving up on this easily. We're not transitioning back. There's been no giant block parties erupt, to celebrate all of this.
There have been some, and I've noticed some restaurants now have a lot of people inside.
Yes.
The numbers are up of people willing to unmask and dine. And I think it's partially, look, Santa Clara County, where, most of the Silicon Valley is past 80% single shot, past 70% fully vaccinated. I'm not sure what a scientific, herd immunity would be, but that's pretty good number.
It's got to be there, considering that there are all these people that are asymptomatic or that have already had it and they decided not to get vaccinated. We've got to be in the 90s now, and it's pretty hard for, a pandemic to break out when you have 90% immunity.
Well, that's the hope, because now we're starting to see people fully in restaurants. If you watch a playoff game, the NHL or the NBA, you think, whoa, there are a lot of people.
Yes.
Together in those seats. And so assuming that 2 weeks from now, when the playoffs are moving on, we don't have a big breakout. It's good news. These vaccines are working. And but it's interesting that, a lot of us are still distant.
So we're not shaking hands yet.
Right. The tech industry seems to be coming back slowly. I visited one company. I think something like 8 out of the 150 people were back in the office. The CEO's walking around saying, hey, where is everybody? Well, you allowed them to stay home. They enjoyed it, and the numbers were strong, and maybe they don't see a reason to come back yet.
Well, I was going to talk about that in a few minutes, but maybe we should talk about it now. Be back by Labor Day seems to be the growing message among executives. James Gorman, chairman and CEO of Morgan Stanley, which has the third largest assets in the United States, I believe. He basically said, look, you come back by Labor Day. If you can go to a restaurant in New York City, you can come into the office.
Right.
And we want you in the office. So this thing we were talking about, that companies, maybe this is a new paradigm, that people won't go back and, the world's changed. Oh, no. Only 9% of large U.S. companies, which is 10,000 employees or more, anticipate their office portfolios will get significantly smaller. They're keeping the buildings. They're building the campuses.
Well, some are. Right. Mark Benioff and Salesforce didn't build that gargantuan tower so that people could sit on their couches.
Phallic symbol hovering over San Francisco.
Apple didn't build its spaceship so that people could stay at home on their Pelotons. And even though the numbers, especially for those two companies, were very strong during the pandemic, they want people to come back. But on the other hand, look at Splunk. We've talked about them, a very, very fast-charging, quick-moving, growing company. They built a huge facility at Santana Row right there in San Jose, and they sold it. They said, we just don't need it. People are going to be at home for the foreseeable future. So we're seeing a little bit of both. And come Labor Day and come early next year, I expect we'll see a lot more people back in the office. But
don't you sense a growing cultural tension, though?
Yeah.
More Americans are quitting right now than they have in decades. It's at the highest rate we've seen in a long, long time. So, I think some people are saying, I don't want to go back to the office again. And the companies are saying, oh, no, you're coming back.
All right, so there's a little tension, but there's only so much leverage you have to quit, and I put that in air quotes, if you need a job. I don't know how many people out there are able to say, oh, they want me back in the office, I'll just stop working. or try to get something
Yeah, that's
else.
a big question. Don't you remember being told when you were a teenager, you only get to quit one job, in anger in your life, and you better do it in your early 20s?
Don't think I was told that, but all right.
You don't do it when your kids need braces,
Right, exactly.
and you got mortgage payments, and the car just needs to go in the shop. You don't quit then. You quit young.
Right. I mean, there may be a shift, and I was talking to CEOs about this. Hey, you have an opportunity here to bring people back maybe at a slightly staggered rate and slightly different times. And wouldn't that be nice? One of the big things that people hate about working in the Bay Area and the tech industry is the traffic.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can stagger your workers, maybe you can get rid of some of that rush hour traffic. And wouldn't that be a benefit to workers even beyond a pay raise or a gym or, snacks or whatever? Is just not having your blood pressure rise when you're on your way and from work each day.
Okay, but then if we go to a shift model, given the way people work in Silicon Valley, if you don't have to go in till noon, you got the night shift, and your fellow workers have the morning shift. The demands on your time are going to spread out to incorporate both shifts.
True.
So you're suddenly working an 18-hour day, but officially you only come in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon after lunch.
Right. I mean, these are all possibilities, but I think you got to the core of it when you said these companies are starting to, I don't know if crack the whip is the right word, but they're starting to say, hey, we want to see you back in the office, and we're going to bring you back to the office. And for the most part, they're saying we're bringing you back vaccinated, get those shots. And that makes for a workplace that I think people will feel okay going back to.
I'd invest in professional clothing companies right now, because I think not only have people become accustomed to dressing like we are right now in T-shirts and jeans, but I think when they try to put their office clothes back on after this year, they aren't going to fit.
Right.
They're just going to have to get all new business ensembles, and I think that's a boom market right now. Not for long.
I agree. Also, the local cleaner that I take shirts to said they had to get new equipment because people are bringing their good clothes back. That's been dusty for so long that they're overwhelmed, and that's a sign that people are going back to work, but also going out on dates again, getting social, and that's really good for the overall economy.
Okay, let's go on some other things. Bitcoin shoots higher when Elon Musk tweets about Tesla taking it as payment again. But there's a caveat in there, right?
Sure.
So the caveat is if it has an improved environmental impact. I'm still trying to get my head around the environmental impact of Bitcoin. Can you explain it to me? I mean, I must be dumb in this area. We just have more server farms and it's sucking more electricity, so we burn more coal.
Right.
Oil,
well, Bitcoin mining is very energy intensive.
Yeah.
And so you're using a lot of power off the grid, and I guess it's not clean energy. And so, and that's why.
But the whole point of digital electronics was it was going to be cleaner and require less power. So what's changed? That we just built so much of this stuff? It's so ubiquitous that it's putting a heavy load?
No, I just don't think that mining Bitcoin and creating all this was ever energy non-intensive or was ever clean. I mean, it uses a whole lot of energy to mine this stuff. And now that
use the phrase mine, and that's like a pejorative term. We get this image of people digging in the ground to dig up Bitcoins.
True. All right. You don't have to do that. But right. It's not like you're mining for, diamonds.
But isn't selling a lot of Teslas energy intensive too?
Yeah.
Doesn't that put a burden on the grid as well?
Yeah. I mean, if you how do I say this? Right. If making a car is not good for the environment. The environmental benefit of a Tesla or a Leaf is when you drive it, you're not emitting pollutants.
True.
So they're assuming that people are going to get in cars in the first place. That's not good for the environment. But once you get in a car that's an EV, it's better for the environment because you're not polluting and putting out those emissions.
And it's also not polluting here. We don't have to worry about those guys digging up lead in the middle of China to build the batteries for your Tesla.
But we do in the overall environmental impact of things, and that's where using a lot of energy to mine Bitcoin is. Now, some of these, I don't know, Musk is talking about some, panel that's been put together to find clean ways to do Bitcoin. I have no idea what that means, but maybe there's a less energy intensive way to do this. And Musk says if you can lower that footprint by 50%, they'll accept Bitcoin again as payment. At this point,
is he like the cleverest arbitrage guy in the world right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's an element to this, a pretty big element to this, where it's Musk literally controlling the price of these cryptocurrencies. Yeah. That's too much power for one person, especially one person with his sort of Twitter profile. Let's be honest. You know, he's good at some things leadership-wise and a genius when it comes to space travel and clean cars and all that, but there is something that I'm surprised the SEC is not cracking down on.
He seems to be playing a very high-risk game.
Yeah.
Now, we know that, you know, when Steve Jobs got in trouble with the stock at Apple,
right.
it never was publicly said, of course, but there was this feeling that the government protected him because he was too important to take down over something like stock manipulation. Is this Elon's position right now, that he's too important in our society and our economy, that you can't take him down just because he says a few things and moves the price of Bitcoin?
I don't know. I mean, the SEC doesn't usually operate that way. Now, with Jobs, where you're talking about the backdating of stocks,
yeah.
What struck me about that case, and I remember covering...
Apple found a scapegoat?
Well, but Jobs came right out in the very early days of that. And I remember, you know, I was on at that press conference or whatever, and he said, hey, the buck stops with me. We made a mistake. We're going to make good on it. We're going to pay whatever we need to do, and we're not going to do it again. We're going to be more careful. And that may have been CEO speak, but it got it out there. He mea culpa'd it. The story went away. Think of all those other companies.
Andy Grove did that, if you remember, in front of Congress. He did a mea culpa, which no one expected from Andy Grove, and Bill Gates didn't. He was surly.
And who was in court for years and years and years?
Microsoft.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to be said for coming out and admitting something, and the press will go away to an extent. But if you just let it sit, and remember all those companies that were caught up in that backdating scandal for months and months, and none of them would admit it, and the story just sort of hung around like a stench over Silicon Valley.
And it cost billions of dollars in fines. Well, once again, Tesla, what it takes away it giveth. The same week this is going on, it introduces, and this is why we need to save Elon Musk from himself, introduces a new version of the Model S, the Plaid. Okay, you drive a Tesla.
Not the Model S, right.
Goes 0 to 60 in less than 2 seconds. That's a ballistic missile on its side. And it gets almost 400 miles of range. Under 2 seconds. I can't even imagine that. That means you start at the bottom of an on-ramp going on to, say, 280. And by the time you get to the end of the on-ramp, you're over 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, I mean, the S especially, and maybe the X too, these are super, super fast accelerating cars. If you think about, you know, to put it super simply here, a regular car does a million things as you accelerate.
Yeah.
With a EV, you're kind of flipping on a switch.
Yeah.
And so you just floor it and you go.
It's all torque.
Yeah. And so it's much faster. I think truck drivers will like this when the EV trucks come out.
Yeah, but can you trust the average American driver with a car that's 0 to 60 under 2?
Right. Maybe we need to make sure only. I don't know.
I mean, the hottest car I ever drove in was a 427 stuffed into a Chevy Nova, okay?
Right.
And I don't think that made 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds, okay? This is under 2 seconds. This is faster than the fastest cars. That's faster than a Bugatti Veyron.
Right. This is the fastest car, and you're,
So everybody has their own
everybody
has their own personal McLaren driving down Stevens Creek Boulevard.
Well, everybody that can afford the price of a Model S, not to mention the Plaid version, ultra luxurious, the big battery. The number that sticks out here for me is not the under 2 seconds. I'm not an acceleration guy.
Range.
Yeah, the range. We're getting close to 400 miles on a charge, which is high even for gas cars, and that's good news. And that's, I think, very important news if EV adoption is going to be,
I believe they build gas engine cars, the combination of tank capacity with mileage to give an average of 400 miles. So Tesla's now there.
Right, and what has to happen, and I'm impressed by the less expensive cars. I mean, Tesla's Model 3 can be had in the $30,000 range.
Mm-hmm.
That'll still get you close to, 300, 310 miles. The Bolt, even a little less expensive, that'll get you to something. The Leaf is, 175, I think, at this point. So we're getting to the point, actually, maybe there's a version above 200. There's, we're getting to the point where range anxiety is not really much of a thing anymore on a lot of these cars that are not priced like a Model S. And that's so important for adoption. So to find out that, okay, yeah, if you're going to pay a lot of money, you can get nearly 400 miles of range, as well as all the luxury and speed and all that stuff. But
and
again,
so, you don't get that mileage anxiety, because you're probably not going to ever drive more than 400 miles in a day, in your life, which means, so you're going to plug in every night, and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right, and you're starting to see, not only with Tesla, but some other companies, where when you make a long-range trip, there are these places to charge quickly,
yeah.
and that's important too. And again, it's an infrastructure thing that's important, especially if we want people who are, let's say, in apartment complexes to have these EVs, because they may not be able to charge in their own garage. Mm-hmm. So there are this network out there, and we're starting to see some of these companies. ChargePoint is now a publicly traded company, and we're starting to see
ChargePoint now has the capital to really build up infrastructure.
And I think we'll see that in the coming months.
Okay, Microsoft shareholder and activist Arjuna Capital said it has introduced a resolution seeking a report on the, quote, effectiveness of the company's workplace sexual harassment policies, unquote. Well, we know who that's aimed at. Right.
I mean, that's the Bill Gates fallout from him stepping down, from what could be a public divorce. Who knows? But
I think you may be heading north to cover a story in late November, early December. That the next Microsoft annual meeting should be really interesting.
I agree. With the activists coming out and now saying, hey, and anything like this comes from the top. And if there was sexual harassment and a bad workplace environment at the Bill Gates level, that sets the tone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it could be ugly.
And could be eye-opening too.
Yes.
What we discover. Okay, no from Grove, quote, it must suck to be Taiwan right now. The G7 calls out China yesterday, and in response, China sends 28 warplanes over Taiwan. Yes, dump your TMSC stock. I don't think, if things get worse, we've been talking about this for almost a year now. If things get worse, and China really, that's the most number of warplanes interfering in Taiwan's airspace ever. That TMSC, which makes most of the world's chips, they're building fab in the U.S., but they can't build it fast enough. That's 3 or 4 years out. We seem to be going into a very vulnerable window in the digital world right now. And, let's hope we get through without too much misery.
Thomas Friedman famously wrote, the author, that the world is flat.
Yeah.
And he was largely talking about India and the relationship we have, but also with Asia. And as countries, and we saw it with Brexit. What does that mean for business? What does the tension in China mean for business? Not to mention their ongoing human rights concerns, and yet Apple sells so many iPhones there. The world is not a smooth, flat surface.
No.
We may try to do business all over the world, but there are factors that are affecting this.
And we forget history. History's replete with stories of countries going to war, unexpectedly, or major crises and all that. And we get these peaceful interregnums and we go, oh, okay, so we got it all figured out now. Let's go global. Let's just all hold hands. And then the cycles of history come back. We can't escape them. And, there are periods, it's hard to believe, in our present situation, that there might be, we had just had a pandemic, it was suddenly all the rules got changed. A war breaks out and we have too much vulnerability there. We can't just withdraw to our own shores anymore. We can't be an isolationist America, even in the business world. So we'll see. I'm not feeling good about that one. Okay, did you read about the new chair of the Federal Trade Commission?
Yes.
Lena Khan.
Right.
32 years old. Now, when you get old, everybody starts looking young, but I could not imagine a 32-year-old chair of the FTC. Though, I mean, she certainly got the resume, but the question is, she's a Columbia law professor, and she's famous for her argument that Amazon's retail business should be separated from its selling platform. And she doesn't seem to have a lot of love for Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple either. So does this augur something big? She going after him?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm interested and pleased to see a young person in this kind of office, given the kind of, someone who's going to focus on tech. Now, yeah, some tech, bigwigs may be shaking in their boots because her focus has not been entirely hands off, to put it mildly. This is the kind of person that perhaps we expected an Elizabeth Warren presidency to put into, as the NFTC chair instead of Biden. But it'll make things interesting. Finally, someone speaks the language. And you say, oh, she's so young, but that means she speaks the language. She understands what's going on in the tech world. And she's not the first person on the government side who said, we need to look at how big and powerful these tech companies are. She may be the first person that understands how these tech companies work. She
won't actually be bamboozled when Mark Zuckerberg starts talking complex gibberish.
Right. She's not going to say, how does Facebook make money? Yeah. She knows how Facebook makes all its money. And Amazon. And she's saying some of that is perhaps, I don't know, illegal. Perhaps it goes against antitrust rules. And that's why it's going to get more interesting.
Okay, well, you know me, I've always been really pro-competition. I don't like these giant monopolies or near monopolies. I do worry a little bit that we won't get a measured response, that we have a young firebrand in there who's going to, raise hell and cause a lot of confusion and chaos. I think these giant companies have earned the right to get their asses kicked in a big way and brought down to reality. Let's see what she does.
Yes.
There's a distinct, she got unanimous votes, vote in the Senate, I believe. So the Senate seems to think she's got something going. We'll see. We'll see if the administration, looking at the economy, really wants to start busting, trust busting right now.
This is a green light for antitrust concerns, I think.
It really is. Okay. Google research. Here's something to give hope to all wafer design people out there. Google researchers show that artificial intelligence can design microchips better and faster than human beings. We'll see.
Yeah. AI has always been something kind of interesting.
Yeah, the idea of robots building robots is sort of this dystopian fear we all have, that will human beings be rendered superfluous in this new world. We're starting to get all these warnings too. We'll see. These things, these big claims never quite pan out. This is Silicon Valley. Everybody makes giant claims. Most of them don't work. Okay. AMD. I never thought when we started this podcast that we would talk as much about AMD as we have.
Well, this is, I think, the big news when it comes to Google and chips. Google choosing AMD for cloud computing services based on the AMD chip architecture, which is a big win for AMD.
Real big win.
Even while...
Again, maybe the best run company in Silicon Valley right now.
Right. I think, you look to AMD, you look to NVIDIA, you look to the modern CEOs, Lisa Su, Jensen Huang, they are really, and boy, are their investors getting rich. I mean, as of this morning, NVIDIA is worth twice what Intel is worth, two times what they're worth. AMD still behind, but they're a $100 billion company now. That's amazing for AMD.
And what's interesting, I think it started with Tim Cook. The new generation of CEOs, there are no movie stars in there. There are no giant, overwhelming personalities. We have Elon, but he, in a sense, he's old guard. These sort of outrageous maverick Howard Hughes kind of characters. These new ones, I don't even know what these people look like. I know their name. Right. I know what they're accomplishing, but I don't see them in advertisements. I don't see them, driving a like AMD's original guy, Jerry Sanders driving around in his Bentley, wearing spats. I mean,
it's a different game. Look at the CEO of Google, of Alphabet, Sundar Pichai, Microsoft, AMD, a lot of these companies that are putting product and company first and CEO personality second. Obviously, Elon Musk is an outlier on that, for better or for worse, if you're a Tesla investor. But yeah, the new model seems to be, let's not have our CEO dance on stage. I'm looking at you, Steve Ballmer. Let's instead have a CEO behind the scenes just cranking out good results and occasionally speaking on issues. Tim Cook is starting to get more political, Sundar Pichai to an extent, and that's okay. That's been okay for a while.
But there's no cult of personality.
Right, no cult of personality.
Which, it's an interesting change. It's very un-Valley-like.
I don't know, isn't it?
Or
historically,
very new Valley-like.
Right, and maybe old Valley-like. I mean, if you go back to some of the early...
Way back.
Well, Noyce and Grove type people, they weren't there to... I mean, okay, so Andy Grove once did dance in the bunny suit, but,
Yeah, Noyce.
Yeah.
We'll go with Noyce. and maybe Bill Hewlett.
Yeah.
Not Dave Thacker, but Bill Hewlett. Okay. It's an interesting change. And I'd be interested in the sociology of why that is. Because it used to be the CEO personified the company, and so investors would invest because of their trust in the CEO. Now it's like, look at our balance sheet. Judge us by that. Judge us by our market share. Interesting. It's just a very interesting term. It says something about the value that I haven't quite deciphered. Okay, and 23andMe goes public.
Yeah, speaking of CEOs who are important, impressive, but she prefers to be behind the scenes. And 23andMe is a controversial company.
Oh, it is.
The gene data, do we give up our DNA privacy so that...
Didn't they also admit that at some point, I seem to remember reading this, that they always threw in like 1% of your genes was some... Neanderthal, or there was, for a while, it was Indian, and another time it was Native American, then it was Ashkenazi Jew, and it was always like less than 1%. It was like they were trying to not subvert, but kind of control the message to make us all interrelated.
I have not heard about that, but I do know they ran into some trouble when it wasn't just, and I was one of the very early people to admit, I spit in the thing.
Oh, I spit in the thing too.
I did a very early story with them, and I was curious, and none of the results were that surprising.
Yeah.
But they also said, hey, you may have some characteristics for these diseases, and the health organizations cracked down on that and said you can't do that.
Yeah.
And so they stopped, and then they were able to come back with a little bit, so it's still more genetics. But there's still a little health component, but it is, again.
Didn't you find though when you did it, the results were not staggering? I thought I thought they'd be revelatory. I'd read these and go, oh my God, I come from County Mayo, and an obscure little village in Wales, but you tend to get these sort of mega results. Yeah, your ancestors began in Africa. Well, okay, yeah, like everybody else.
Right. Well, and if you do any sort of personal genetic history on your own or your family tree, 23andMe probably won't surprise you that much. Now, I've heard stories, and I know people who have had these stories where it turns out somewhere along the line somebody's had a little fling, and it turns out your grandfather is whatever.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And
YouTube has some of these unveiling ceremonies, too, where people get surprised.
Yeah, maybe don't make it a ceremony.
Yeah.
But I think that the controversy here is that they are ultimately collecting this extremely private data and selling it for research. And is that a good thing? I think that them being public, and remember this was by SPAC, by the way, so it wasn't a traditional IPO, but them being public puts more of a spotlight on and more regulation, and that's good. Now, the fact that it was a SPAC means we didn't get as much information as I was hoping when they did go public, but the spotlight means they will be closely followed as for whatever they end up doing with your genetic research or genetic data.
Took them a while to go public. They've been around a while now.
Yeah.
They're not in the limelight like they were 5-6 years ago.
Right. Well, when they were in the limelight, it wasn't for all that.
Yeah, for good stuff.
Yeah. So they're one of those companies that says, okay, look, if we do this right, we can hopefully fight some diseases and come up with some better health care and try to do it quietly as you can when you're a DNA collecting company.
SPACs. Let's talk about SPACs for the final thing. Are you getting a vibe they're just about over? There seems to be a growing backlash against them and a kind of sense of distrust. I know the battery company in Novix is going public soon, and that's a T.J. Rogers SPAC.
Right.
Are there any other ones?
Well, and you bring
around
up
here right now?
But you bring up an important point. I think that the reason we're seeing fewer SPACs is people aren't trusting them as much,
Yeah.
and they're not being rewarded.
Yeah.
A lot of these companies, Lordstown, are they're going public too early and they're struggling. T.J. Rogers has a lot of trust in the Valley in the tech industry. So, all right, that may,
He's an old CEO.
Right.
The old guard.
23andMe went public, a Richard Branson SPAC. Now, Richard Branson is,
sure,
flamboyantly crazy, but he is well respected in the financial community and the tech community. So that's where they got their SPAC. So
it's interesting. We're trusting companies if they have the modern anonymous, person in the control room, CEO, but we're rewarding SPACs when they're run by famous people that are iconic and mavericks.
Right. But I think what it comes down to is we still had Hollywood types and famous people investing in companies with regular IPOs.
Yes.
Airbnb had a regular listing, right? They didn't go SPAC, and Ashton Kutcher got paid and Bono got paid, and good for them. A SPAC is less trusted because there's less due diligence.
Yes, there's less information.
Yeah, so if more investors get burned by these SPACs, we'll see less of them. It's that simple. You'll follow the money.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Have a great weekend. Stay cool, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.